evening, viewers. Tonight, I know I promised you we were going to have a second round of conversation on the growing incidences of mob violence. But what has happened this evening has left all of us shocked and has made us ask these questions about whether the media, the press in our country is at risk, is being targeted, whether there is a concerted attempt repeatedly to silence the media, whether this is an attack on democracy. In any country which has the kind of record that we do in terms of attack on journalists, attack on the media, people by now would be out on the streets questioning this kind of democracy. Every few weeks, somebody or the other is threatened, attacked, and also killed. We are one of the worst performers in our League of Nations across the world when it comes to protecting the press freedom. On the eve of Eid, at about 7:15 p.m. on Thursday evening, the editor-in-chief of Rising Kashmir was shot dead right outside his office just as he was getting inside his car to go for iftar. His security officer was also shot, and the attackers who came on a bike then escaped. We haven't seen a journalist being targeted in the valley at least in a decade that I can remember. Not at least in a specific targeted planned manner. Shujat Bukhari was not caught in the crossfire while he was covering clashes between the security forces and the pelters. Shujat Bukhari was targeted. A journalist with years and years of experience who wrote and reported on facts of what was happening in Kashmir has been silenced tonight, which is why I believe tonight it is imperative to take up this issue. Joining us this evening, Harsh Mandar, social activist, Vinod Sharma, political editor for Hindustan Times, Mr. Ellen Rao, former DCP of Delhi Police, Mr. Vikram Singh, former DGP of Uttar Pradesh, stays on with us. And I'll also have Gauhar Gilani with me in just a bit, also a senior journalist. But I want to go across to Mr. Vinod Sharma first. Mr. Vinod Sharma, and this is across the country. This is not about a conflict zone. Across the country, from Bengaluru to the northeast, the Hindi heartland down south, in our Kashmir, people are not thinking twice before targeting journalists.
Well, of course, you couldn't have told the truth more candidly. In fact, you know, it is not the journalist, but his relative truth that is being targeted. I have known Shujat Bukhari for many years. In fact, in 2004, he was part of the delegation that I led to the other side of Kashmir as a peace process. And he was an honest raconteur of what was happening in Kashmir, and also was a peacenik who wanted peace in his region. And he became a target for obvious reasons. I wonder who was unduly upset with his relative truth, from which direction the bullet came. I'm not able to decipher right now. I am only expecting that whether there was a CCTV camera at the place where he was shot dead, because the assailants, as initial reports are saying, came on a motorbike. And there has been no report yet that they came with muffled faces. So I think the first task today is for the police and other intelligence organizations who are active in the valley to find out as to who did Mr. Shujat Bukhari in. Secondly, please understand, Kashmir today is the most difficult terrain to report, like many other terrains in our country. And journalists have virtually no protection except their own wisdom, their own ability to their ear to the ground and their impulses that can save them and yet help them do their job. Shujat Bukhari, he used to be my first halt in Srinagar when I'd want to go and see as to what's happening there. And mind you, he was at cross purposes, he was defiant against the state government not very long ago, just a year back, when there was a censorship imposed and he was in the forefront of the protest against the censorship. At the same time, his proclivity to peace was also had potential to annoy people who don't want to see peace happening in Kashmir. I wonder who has killed him. I mean, I'm actually, frankly, I would be able to sort my thoughts out if I get to know if there is some indication as to from which side did the bullet come. Which side did the bullet come from? And then the discussion on this whole episode of his assassination and the overall threat that journalists in India and across the world are facing in the pursuit of relative truth can be discussed. As of now, one can only condole with his family. One can only, be a little upset that here was a guy who was a peacenik besides being an honest reporter on the ground. I remember last time when I met him, there were certain reports published on the page 1 of his newspaper, and he said that some people are upset in the government that why am I publishing this? And he said, if I do not publish this, I would be not true to my job. And when I am publishing this, I am being perceived as being pro-militancy. Look at this, journalists being torn between two roles that they need to perform. And there is no training virtually to journalists as to how to handle this situation. Not that Shujat was not trained adequately. He had years of experience working out of Kashmir, first for the Hindu and then his own newspaper. I remember when we are there on the other side of Kashmir, Mirpur, Muzaffarabad, and also Gilgit finally, he was a man who would stand up and be counted at times in a minority of one to ask tough questions of the hosts there. So if you are going to be one doing your job honestly, you are facing a threat, obviously. And you will have to save yourself by your own impulses. No amount of police protection, no amount of state protection can help a journalist. Only his destiny can help him, and his quick impulses can help him. And thirdly, the people can help him. What's happening? How is Kashmir being reported in our country today? Every evening between 8 to 10, there are certain platforms which are spewing venom on the people of Kashmir. And the feeling today in Kashmir amongst common people is that they have been abandoned by the rest of India. That has to be restored. If we want to make any progress in pulling Kashmir out of the abyss that it has sunk into. And for this, every single section of the society is responsible, including a section of the media. And that is where a debate is required within the Indian media as to national interest, as defined by some people, is being rightly pursued by the kind of narratives that we flaunt every evening at the expense of, which alienate people rather than make them join the process of reconciliation.
Yes. No, so
that's the most unfortunate thing.
Mr. Sharma,
I sometimes wonder, one last point, one last point, I sometimes wonder that people who talk about peace, are they victims of just the militancy, or are they also the victims of the verbal violence that happens every night?
Yes, I get your point. I get what you're saying, Mr. Sharma. But here is what I want to understand and ask our experts today. It shouldn't matter whether you have a view which is on the left side or on the right side. It shouldn't matter whether you are you have the favor of a pro-India opinion or a pro-separatist opinion. You're a journalist, and Shujat Bukhari was that. and he reported on what was happening. He gave his own expert view on how things were changing in Kashmir. He did his job, and he has been killed. So who is going to protect those honest people who are actually doing their job, Harsh Mandar? In all of this noise that we have today about the labels that are being given out to people, to activists, to journalists, who is going to protect those people who are actually genuinely, honestly doing their job?
You were talking about journalists and the media under threat today in India. I see journalists who are independent, who speak truth to power, who take positions, according to their own judgment and conscience, who do not look to, the state or to the government or to people in power to decide what they want to report or how they want to report it. They are the ones who are in great danger in India today. We have one segment of the media which is, which has chosen to remain complicit and silent, and as Vinod was also saying, to feed into the kind of hatred and frenzy and polarization that the ruling political establishment might want to see. But journalists who keep themselves apart from it and act according to their conscience are doing so in conditions which are, growing. They're putting themselves to risk every single day of their lives. And Shujat, he stood for peace, but he also stood for truth, and he wanted the people of India, the rest of India, to understand what is happening in Kashmir. He's talking about the realities, the kind of everyday violence that has become so normalized in Kashmir, and he tells it every day with courage, and yet places it within a framework of a belief in peace and reconciliation. And that is really precious, that is hugely courageous, and people like these are people who are doing a public service without any kind of protection, and with the continuous danger of being stigmatized by this side or that side, as you said, but whereas they remain true to their conscience. So I think it's also a moment to pay homage to an entire segment of India's media who still stand by their truth and by their conscience.
Yes, forgive me please, I'm interrupting you right now, but we've got some breaking news coming in right now. Well, we have now a confirmation coming in that the army soldier who had been abducted in Pulwama his body has been found. That is what ANI is reporting right now. This is the information that we've got. Remember, today itself an army man was also abducted in Jammu and Kashmir, in Pulwama. I'm going to quickly go across to Fareed and check if he's got any information, further information or confirmation on this. Fareed?
Yes, Tanvi, that's right. His dead body has been recovered. Officially, they are yet to confirm, but since the photographs and videos are already out, so it is pretty much confirmed. His fate was sealed the moment he was abducted by the militants, because he was someone who was on their radar, was part of almost every insurgency operation in South Kashmir, was an important member of 44 Rashtriya Rifles, and since he was local, when I say he's from Jammu, Poonch, had today applied, in fact was going for a leave, obviously was going to his family to be part of the festivities. But then it seems that militants were in complete know-how of his plans. As soon as he boarded a local vehicle, they intercepted him at Pulwama. He was brought down and then they took him away. It was at that very time that his fate was sealed, as I said, though the security forces did launch a search operation. But now His dead body has been recovered, bullet-riddled dead body has been recovered from Pulwama itself, and now the police has taken it into custody. So that's the latest. His Aurangzeb, his name was Aurangzeb, was part of the 44 Rashtra Rifles that do the anti-insurgency duties in South Kashmir's Pulwama and Shopian district.
Well, that is really unfortunate news coming in at a time when there is a unilateral ceasefire in Kashmir. This is how, this is the response that the forces are being given. An army man who was abducted, his body has allegedly now been found. We are waiting official statement from the army on this. Fareed, I also want to quickly check with you on what happened earlier in the evening. The other ghastly incident when about 3 bike-borne assailants came and shot at Shujat Bukhari in the press enclave. Fareed?
Yes, an absolute shocker. In fact, the whole journalistic fraternity is they're dumbfounded because this was something that was not expected, because he was one of those saner voices, balanced voice, and while obviously he would have had enemies, he was the owner of a leading newspaper, a veteran journalist, but no one had thought in their wildest dreams that he would meet such an end. As you rightly said, 3 bike-borne assailants came close, and as soon as he got down from his office in the press enclave, he entered his vehicle, and it was that very time that these people fired at the vehicle from at least 2 directions. He, along with his 2 PSOs, was killed there and then. While they did take them to the hospital, but by then it was too late. As I said, this has shocked one and all, but this is not a plain and simple case like the army men's case, because in this they'll have to investigate who's behind this, because as I said, he may have many enemies. There is the militant angle as well. There are so many angles that they'll have to investigate. But the very fact that this has happened in Srinagar, in broad daylight, in the press colony area, which is considered to be very heavily guarded and secured, tells a lot about the situation on the ground. And as I said, police, other than this statement, is clueless as of now. Obviously, in the coming days, they'll investigate it, and maybe we'll come to know who exactly is.
Okay, we have lost that line with Fareed. Like I said, this has happened in the press enclave. We had Fareed earlier also, and then we managed to get him back now. We will keep going back to our reporters on ground to get you more information. For now, let's get back to the conversation that we were having with our panelists. Let me go across to Mr. Ellen Rao and Vikram Singh on this aspect. Vinod Sharma said something that really stood out for me, which is to say that no amount of security can protect the journalists. It's only it's probably our destiny. We have to be careful, we have to be aware and take precautions, and maybe people have to change, show us that respect, and change their view. Can security be provided, Mr. Vikram Singh? Are we looking at a situation where it is becoming a more and more difficult task to protect the media?
Tanvi, Mr. Vinod Sharma had a very relevant point to make when he said that it is our destiny. I would not say it is destiny. No security in the world is foolproof and absolutely invincible. John F. Kennedy said, if one man decides to trade his life with mine, the probability is that he can. And those were prophetic words for John F. Kennedy himself. Now, I don't say that security is irrelevant. Security, of course, is an add-on. And what are the other factors who would contribute to your security is robust common sense. And again, the spirit of change. And change is the surest way of securing yourself. You may not have adequate security, but you are reasonably secure if you subscribe to change. And if you have security and then subscribe to change and do not have a specific routine, you are more than 99% safe. In this case also, if you were to see, if you were to go back, there was a routine, there was a probability, and there was a predictability in the conduct of the protectee that he would leave at this time, take a particular route, go for iftar, and then it is said. It's always so simple to be wise after the event, but then the moment I am predictable, I am a sitting duck. Therefore, regular protection plus being unpredictable and taking
everybody by surprise, that would be an add-on. But again, Vinod Sharma ji had a very, very pertinent point to make, that no security is foolproof. There have to be add-ons. And those add-ons would vary from day to day and on the combat indicators. And therefore, security is an imperative. After that security, the element of surprise, and after that, be alert to the ground reality.
Mr. Rao, to you also a question on this. Is there also, we've not seen too many convictions or too many cases where proper action has been taken, where journalists have been targeted. Many of those cases still remain unresolved. Are the police authorities in general a bit more conscious about the fact that they must go take 2 extra steps to ensure that when media is targeted, justice is done in those cases?
Look, the security is a very important aspect to all of the protectees, and particularly to the police officers who are being targeted, and the journalists who are doing their job in the ground and in the particular area, like in the sensitive area in the Kashmir, where the terrorism is on the peak. And this is a very condemnable, cowardice, you can say. We all must condemn it, and cowardice act has been done with Mr. Sajjad Bukhari, who has been killed in a cold-blooded like this. And as far as security is concerned, you must be having the history of in our India itself, that even Mrs. Gandhi could not be saved by the security. There was a foolproof security with her, and even the Rajiv Gandhi was also assassinated within the parameters, within the circumstances of the security. But at the same time, there are some norms, as Mr. Vinod Sharma ji and ex-DG has enumerated all these things. Then there should be the protectee has also to be to see himself that how that there are do's and don'ts, and there are some certain guidelines that we should follow as being a protectee. And at the same time, these police officers who were protecting them, and I think in this case also that one PSO has been killed and another has been injured.
Yes.
And therefore we must be alert when there are some serious security threats, and there should be a necessity of being alertness, a high degree of alertness, all these in such areas and in such circumstances. And particularly the local police now, I think they will be dealing with this case, and they will be collecting the evidence to trace these culprits as soon as possible. And on the eve of Eid, I must condemn that because that there was a peace, and Mr. Sajjad Bukhari was also doing the peace process, and he was a voice for keeping the peace in Kashmir.
Yes.
And it is not only the murder of Sajjad Bukhari, it's a murder of peace and a murder of voice which was being spoken.
Yes.
To maintain peace in the area.
Yes. Gaur Gilani, senior journalist, also joining us right now. Mr. Gilani, my condolences. I know it's a big loss for you as well. I'm given to understand that Mr. Bukhari had been targeted more than once in the past as well. He still continued to do his job, to speak his mind, and to do justice to being a journalist. Mr. Gilani?
Yeah, it's a very, very tragic day for Kashmiri media fraternity in particular, and the people of Jammu and Kashmir in general, because this attack also shows how vulnerable the lives of Kashmiri journalists are, who feel suspended between 2 guns, one with the armed forces and one with the non-state actors. And Mr. Sajjad Bukhari was one of the very moderate voices from Jammu and Kashmir, and the editor of 4 newspapers. And it's a very, very personal loss to me as well, because I have known him for more than a decade. And everybody in the media fraternity is in a shock, and it's very, very tragic the manner in which he was brutally killed. And he's survived by 2 children, one son Tamheed and a daughter Duriya, and his wife Tahmina Bukhari. So it's a very, very shocking news for all of us. and again it shows that how being opinionated and how being having an opinion on Kashmir makes one vulnerable in Jammu and Kashmir. And this is not the first attack on journalists. If you remember, there was an attack on an NDTV journalist Zafar Iqbal in May 2002. Before that, in 1995, Yusuf Jamil, who then worked for the BBC, there was a parcel bomb attack in which his colleague Mushtaq Ali was killed. And before that, Parvaz Sultan, another journalist, was killed. So it has been happening. These attacks have been happening since 1989. And even Zafar Meraj was attacked by the renegades, who were the government-sponsored gunmen. So everybody is targeting journalists because nobody likes their opinion, because it can, a journalist cannot make everybody happy. That's the sad part.
Very well said, Mr. Gilani. I completely agree with you. Journalists cannot make everybody happy. It is not our job to make anyone happy. Our job is that of a messenger who honestly brings out the truth. And unfortunately, that truth is always uncomfortable for some people, which makes us extremely vulnerable. Mr. Gilani, I want to understand from you, are the authorities right now in Jammu and Kashmir conscious of this fact? That whether you lean this way or that way, or you are independent in your own view, the media is vulnerable and susceptible and needs to be given due protection at this point of time.
See, the sad part is that in 2002, Shujat Bukhari was also attacked, and since then he is under protection. He was already having security, and this is what has happened when two of his personal security guards were with him, and both of them, we hear, have also succumbed to their injuries. And when this can happen to someone who is already under protection for the last decade or more than a decade, what will happen to those journalists who have no security? That's point number one. And all the journalists who have been targeted since 1989, it's not only the non-state actors. It is the attacks have happened from the armed forces, attacks have happened from the powers that be, the renegades, who are also known as Ikhwan headed by Kukapare. So all the people have with guns in their hands have found journalists as sitting ducks. Somebody doesn't like your opinion, somebody doesn't like your piece of writing, report, and you become very, very vulnerable. So this has been a sad story of Kashmir for the last 3 decades. And it also raised question marks because where Shujat was attacked is in the press enclave, which is in the heart of Srinagar city. And there are 2 police stations surrounding that press enclave. So if that attack, brazen attack, can happen in such a sensitive place like Srinagar and to a person who is already under protection, you can...
We seem to have lost the connection. We'll just try and fix that. Tanveer Sadiq, spokesperson of the National Conference, on the phone line with me, and Mr. Kuldeep Khoda, former DGP of Jammu and Kashmir. Mr. Tanveer Sadiq, coming across to you first. Okay, we seem to have lost that line. Mr. Kuldeep Khoda, I'm going to come to you right now. Of course, it's an extremely challenging task for the security personnel in Jammu and Kashmir to first, of course, fight the terrorists, the militants, to ensure that the civilians are protected, to then ensure that they themselves are protected. Today is a day when we're seeing that CRPF has been attacked, an army man has been abducted and now killed, we understand, and a journalist has been shot dead. How are you viewing what is happening in Kashmir right now?
Well, this is very unfortunate. Today's incident, the media has a very difficult role to play, especially in the conflict zone, the situation which is prevailing in Jammu and Kashmir right now. Shujat was one of the saner voices and a dear friend, and he has been always supportive of saner elements while reflecting his views in the media. Of late, he had been also pushing for saner elements to come forward and respond to the initiative of talks from the government of India also, as well. But as you know, the elements who are inimical to the peace, he has become target to those, and the result is that the saner voice get suppressed. Obviously, we have to create an atmosphere whereby saner voices can come up and they can respond to the need of the hour in bringing peace to the valley. And for that, government of India has to think seriously about and come up with a very definite plan to see how peace can be restored if the situation remains bad, then obviously the senior elements will get relegated to the background and more militant voices will come forward. That's not good for us. That's not good for India. That's not good for J&K. And it requires a deeper thinking. It's not a question of journalists only. It's of all the senior elements who require to be brought forward.
Yes.
In contributing something to bring peace to the valley.
Unfortunately, Mr. Koda, what happens is that the saner voices and the rationals are the ones who get absolutely no support from any side, because it doesn't suit a specific side's agenda or narrative. My question to you is, if, in this scenario where where warmongers are being given a long rope, do you think, as a peace advocate, Shujat Bukhari was probably targeted for being a peace advocate?
You know, he has been reflecting the views of senior elements more than the radical voices. Obviously, that has not gone well with the people who don't want peace to be brought back to the valley. And the result is that he has been targeted. And we have to seriously think about it and see how the situation can be tackled, because this the ceasefire announcement has also not given us the dividends which we were expecting.
Yes.
On the other hand, the army man was abducted, and it's also believed that he has been shot. The 2 policemen were killed the day before yesterday. 10 CRPF personnel were also injured in a hand grenade incident. And today, Shujat Bukhari has been targeted along with his security guards. So are the initiatives which are being taken to restore peace, are they working? What is our plan of action to deal with the situation in Kashmir? What's our plan to deal with Pakistan? Because that is the fountainhead of terrorism, and that's sending terrorists across the border to us. So all these things require a serious thinking.
Yes, absolutely.
And a definite plan needs to be evolved.
Yes, a more consistent policy is definitely the need of the hour, and so is the fact that the authorities and the government needs to be conscious of the fact that those who are speaking their mind, those who are reporting on the truth, they have to be protected. They have to also be safeguarded. If any kind of sanity has to be maintained in any part of our country. Kuldeep Koda, thank you so much, sir, for speaking with us. Junaid Mattu of the National Conference also on the phone line with me. Junaid Mattu, this is really unfortunate what has happened this evening. It's been a while. It's been several years since we saw this kind of a planned attack to silence a journalist.
I don't think it's been only several. I think it's been more than a decade and a half.
Yes.
And for people who say that we are going into a situation where it resembles the 90s, it's completely wrong. I was here in the 90s. This is much worse than the 90s. The rhetoric from New Delhi notwithstanding, the denial and delusions of our chief minister notwithstanding, every barometer of turmoil and violence, be it abductions, beheadings, hundreds of boys joining local militancy, sporadic violence that erupts in every nook and corner of the state. The fact that since 1996, for the first time, you had to abort an election in South Kashmir, an election which you can't conduct to this date, which is the longest delay since 1996. If these all are not indications that the slide in Kashmir is serious and unprecedented, and you had, it's hilarious. You had the Prime Minister's, the MOS in the PMO, Dr. Jatinder Singh, just a few days ago say that militancy in Kashmir is in its last stage. So if this is the level of delusion in the PMO, what can one say?
Junaid Mattu, I also wanted to ask you specifically about the security of media. Across the country, we've seen sustained attacks, journalists being targeted. Kashmir, of course, this is the first that we've seen in over a decade. And it's a conflict zone, so there are there's several other nuances as well. But are the political leaders conscious of the fact that you have to provide security to people who are reporting independently on what is happening in Kashmir?
Ma'am, let me be very honest and candid with you. The only people who have security in Jammu and Kashmir are people who are in power, probably a couple of dozen of ministers. The rest have pretense of an excuse for security. maybe some people who are close to power. If you have 2 or 3 PSOs in a car with you, the car is not bulletproof, there is a serious apprehension to your life. Those security guards are as much sitting ducks as you are. But the fact is that no matter how many times this is raised, our security apparatus is not interested in safeguarding lives objectively. There are lives and then there are lives. There are lives to be protected and there are lives which can be, that you can show negligence towards. So at the end of the day, you are all sitting ducks. I have security. I'm a secured person. I travel with security in my car. How am I any different than Shujat Bukhari? So the fact of the matter is that this has become a cuckoo banana republic.
Thank you.
Militancy is thriving primarily because of the failures of the state in Kashmir today. Primarily because of the failures of the state. And secondly, the Pakistan factor is secondary as of today. If the failures of the state, security failures, policy failures, initiative failures were not so glaring, we wouldn't be at the stage where we are today.
To read out to you, Mr. Junaid Mattu, something that Shujat Bukhari wrote in 2012. And this is a larger article that he wrote about journalists being killed in Kashmir. Towards the end of this article, where he goes into specific cases, he also says, unfortunately, there is no mechanism within the journalist fraternity to help the families of these victims. Victims, by that he means journalists who have been killed. For those working in the local media, there is hardly any insurance cover. Despite so much of growth in the past 20 years, journalism is yet to come up as a full-fledged institution in Kashmir. Exploitation of working journalists has been an old story, and the vagaries of conflict have further increased their dangers. The government has no policy of extending help except ex gratia relief given to those who are killed by militants. But in most of these cases, the investigations have not drawn any conclusions to declare that the victims were innocent. And unless the victims are proven to be innocent, his kith and kin are not eligible for any government relief. In many cases, the culprits were from the state apparatus, and given a clean chit to the victim was not possible. My appeal to you, Mr. Junaid Mattu, and to anybody else that I will speak from the political leadership of Jammu and Kashmir, is to keep this in mind. This is an article that was written from a man who is now dead, who's fallen prey to the same system. And I think the political leadership needs to take note of what he raised then, 5 years ago, and ensure that those who are also putting their life at risk, which is the journalist community, their families are also taken care of in the state. Thank you, Junaid Mattu, for speaking with us. I'm going to go back to our panelists at this point of time. Mr. Vinod Sharma, I will come back to you and ask you this question. Do you believe that perhaps Mr. Bukhari, irrespective of who really targeted him, was targeted because he was an advocate of peace?
You see, Faye, first of all, I'm waiting since evening for a statement from the Hurriyat conference. And I have not heard a word from them yet. And Hurriyat conference had been, one is told, had been thinking positively about engaging with the central government and also with the state government after the peace overture, so-called peace overture by the Home Minister and his statements that all stakeholders shall be engaged with, including the one across the border. But that apart, you know, we have been discussing about security of journalists. In a conflict situation, when a journalist is accompanied by policemen, armed policemen, his impartiality is immediately compromised. Please understand that. To be accompanied by gunmen in a conflict situation where the ruling side, the state government and the state, Indian state, are suspected and are perceived to be rivals and enemies, your impartiality is immediately compromised, and the gunmen accompanying you are actually a giveaway that make you a sitting duck. You're not in a bulletproof car, you're not wearing a bulletproof vest, and these people who accompany you, the kind of punishing hours they keep, their responses are lethargic. So it's a no-win situation at all. It's a completely no-win situation. And insofar as Shujat Bukhari's peace efforts are concerned, if you are working for peace in the valley, you are automatically a target for those who want to keep this wound festering. And there are players within our side, and there are players across the border who want to keep this wound festering. They have a vested interest in keeping Kashmir the way it is. Certain political forces, their way of handling Kashmir situation within India is also highly questionable. Often through friendly media platforms, Kashmir is used when flaunted before the eyes of rest of India to polarize people. Now, is this a way to keep an integral part with you? Or are you going to treat Kashmir as a piece of real estate or as a living, thriving entity comprising of people there? These are the big questions, but nobody is debating them. If I'm going to raise them, if I raise these questions or someone else raises these questions, he's immediately branded as anti-national. Now, nobody is willing to spare a thought to the fact that I may have my own definition of good nationalism, which I think is best for my country.
Yes.
But then today you have hacks who are prescribing nationalism without understanding the seriousness of the situation. How can you justify young Kashmiri students, and of course there are faults on the part of Kashmiris as well, but this is not the time to discuss that.
Yes.
That young Kashmiri students who are given admissions in institutes and places in mainland India are mistreated,
yes,
beaten up, sometimes for their dietary habits, sometimes for their complexion, sometimes for their surnames. Is this acceptable? And who is going to provide security to them? We are just worried about us as journalists. You see, there is a risk involved in our job.
Yes.
And that is why I say that, the best of security wouldn't save you.
Yes. But
if you have to go that day. But it may sound a conservative thinking, but that's what it is. So I think that security for a journalist compromises his independence in a conflict situation. And that's a serious issue that needs to be debated.
Yes. Gaur Gilani, I want to come across to you and understand how is this being viewed by you and your colleagues in Kashmir. It's come as a shock, of course. But what does it say about the... Yes, go ahead, please.
See, I completely concur with the last statement made by Mr. Vinod Sharma, in which he said that once a journalist agrees to take a security cover, his impartiality comes into immediate questioning. So be that as it may, I mean, how Shujat Bukhari's killing today has affected the journalist community in Kashmir is it has brought back memories of the last 3 decades. As I was narrating to you, that how journalists have often found themselves sitting ducks from both the state as well as the state, actors who were supported by the state government, known as renegades, and also the non-state actors. Every word a journalist writes, he or she has to first think whether to add allegedly, even if a journalist sees something, a gross human rights violation taking place in front of his or her eyes. And also I want to bring to focus the UN 49-page UN report which came to light today, in which it was said in no inexplicable terms, in no uncertain terms, that the human rights violations that have taken place in Kashmir for the last 3 decades, the armed forces have used excessive force, and that the fact that they have been involved in unlawful killings, and they have also recognized the right of Kashmiris, the right to self-determination, and described the use of pellet firing shotguns as one of the most dangerous weapons. So, I mean, you have to understand and take a holistic view that how Kashmiri lives are in danger, and how this conflict has actually threatened the very existence of being a Kashmiri. So from that point of view, I mean, it comes as a reminder, another reminder, and tragically very, very sad reminder that how vulnerable the lives of Kashmiris are, especially those who wield a pen, who have pen in their hands, who have an opinion, and who write and talk and have an opinion on Kashmir.
Harshmander, do you see this as an attack on someone who advocated peace at a time when we are seeing that there is a slight rise, a portion where the extremist ideology is again gaining pace in Kashmir? We've seen that they themselves seem to be in conflict even with the moderates and the Hurriyats. Is that something that the investigators will have to look at?
No, I really would like to take a view that the security of an upright journalist, an independent journalist, a journalist who believes in peace, is impossible to secure in the environment that we have, that the Indian state establishment has actually allowed to grow to what it has over the last over 2 decades. We need to recognize that what in the 1990s was an uprising of few thousand militants supported from across the border, the level of anguish that ordinary Kashmiri youth are feeling today, they're just a few hundred militants, but you're seeing tens and thousands of young Kashmiri youth coming out onto the streets. Their level of despair has grown so much that they are willing to, you point a gun and they open up their shirt buttons and they say, you can kill me. They've lost their fear because they've lost the hope that peace is possible. And we're seeing, the army chief using language. This is language not against an enemy population, even an enemy civilian population. It's a language against your own people, your own civilian people. So I think what has happened in Kashmir and the use of pellet guns, unprecedented, unparalleled anywhere in the world, the blindings. I went to Kashmir. I went to homes of young people who were blinded, just ordinary, very young kids. I mean, the level of despair and anger and hopelessness that we are seeing in the valley. We are losing, hearts and minds every day. Within that, it is futile to talk about the security. I didn't think it was fair to talk about the journalist himself taking responsibility for his security by changing his routine. He has to do his job with the integrity that he has, but we have to create a larger environment which is based on respect of, firstly, the Kashmiri people as people. We can't make it the most militarized, one of the most militarized locations in the world and believe that we are going anywhere towards peace. So I think there's these are just reminders, and you have an army officer killed, we have a journalist killed, we have civilians killed, over the last month, we have militants killed. And where is all this blood going to ultimately lead us to? As Vinod Sharma says, you might say talking about and criticizing this is anti-national. So be it. But I do believe that we have, if we are fighting not for Kashmir, the land of Kashmir, but for the people of Kashmir and their hearts and minds, we are going completely in the wrong direction.
Right. I'm completely out of time on this conversation. I'll thank my panelists for joining us, that too at such short notice, but we thought that this is an issue that we must pick up and highlight various aspects of it. Here is what I believe in, and this is what I want to reiterate. The voices of reason, the voices of moderation, the messengers of truth, the messengers of facts, the independent voices must be safeguarded in any democracy. Unfortunately, we as a nation have failed in doing this at every single point, especially in the recent few years. Across the country and in conflict zones in our country, the job of a journalist is to report facts. It is not to take sides. It is also not to share their own opinion, to share their own views. We can give you expert comments, but our job is to tell you the real story. And for those who do that, for those who question the authorities, for those who question the government on their decisions, for those who become the voice of the people, for those who bring you the truth and report on the facts, if they come in danger, then we collectively as a nation have failed in understanding that. Through the conversations we've had for the last few hours, one thing that has come out is that Shujat Bukhari too spoke his mind and fearlessly reported. And we have failed to save him. Somebody thought what he was saying didn't suit the narrative, and somebody decided to silence him. Is that what we want our country to be? Where the media is forced to take sides, where the media is forced to be labeled as left or right or pro or anti any kind of ideology? Don't force the media to become that. Respect the independent voices and support them. That is the only way we can protect this small community which seems to be diminishing by the day. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.